Welcome back to the final part of the book show, coming to you from the Bath Literature Festival. Pauline Black catapulted to fame back in late 1970s as lead singer of the popular ska band The Selector, before telling us more about her extraordinary life story, as detailed in her book Black by Design. She's going to perform Second Skin from her new album Made in Britain.
I grew a second skin, thicker than my own, stronger than the one I'm in, softer than the one I show. I drew another heart, sewed it on my sleeve, tough enough not to fall apart, something in which I believe it would be more comfortable, some might say even functional. Why can't we be multicultural? That would be wonderful. Yeah. Do 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 ba do ba do 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 ba do ba do 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 ba do ba do. I showed my soul to someone who wanted to see if it's black. They claimed it as their own, and now they won't give it on back. I live the color I'm in like everyone else today, and sometimes I find my second skin, it only seems to get in the way. It would be more comfortable, some might say even functional. Why can't we be multicultural? That would be wonderful. Yes, that would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Yes, that would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Yes.
Pretty wonderful.
Thank you.
Would you say that music is still your sort of premier form of expression, your chosen form of expression, despite having written the book?
Music has always been my prime, I suppose, form of expression. The book came about because of the music, to a certain extent, because we were thinking very much of putting the Selector back together, you know, celebrating the past 30 years. And I wanted it to be a document, I suppose, of what made me join the two-tone movement, which, of course, is the music music that I am part of. Because I think arguably you could say that that two-tone movement, it only existed for a very short space of time, but it was at a time when, you know, racism was rife on the streets, there were sus laws, you know, young black people rioting on the streets, sound familiar kind of thing, you know, that kind of thing. And we had a recession back then too. And I thought, well, I started off in the 50s. So what is it that I want to say? I am second generation. I was brought up here. And I was adopted. I was adopted by white people in Essex, a working class family. I very much brought up, I suppose, as a little white girl. And I had to design myself black, which is the name of the book, of course.
You talked about the ska movement there and the period when bands like yours were very popular. Do you think that it made any difference? Did it have any impact? And also, do you feel that that was the last time that music really did have a lot to say in terms of sort of the periods of protest songs seemed to end around that period? I'm going to ask you in a minute, Tony, because you'll have an opinion there too.
It's sort of arguable, I suppose, that you could say that that was the last time that there was an actual political movement, maybe politics with a small p, that people actually concerned themselves about the social conditions in which they were living and on what informed them as people. In response to your question, all I can say is that I have a lot of 40-year-old people come up to me after a gig and say, we'd never really thought about racism before. We didn't realise quite what was happening in the black communities in this country. And your music brought that to the fore and made us think in a different way. So, you know, if we reconstructed a few minds along the way, I'm happy.
Tony, you'd left the NME where you used to be a writer by the time I think...
burned out by then, yeah. I'd done
you
my
were
3
burned
years.
out,
I
you
was
were what, like
washed up,
17?
washed up music journalist,
but,
yeah.
But do you still see that? Do you look back on that period as being a period when really important stuff was being voiced?
For sure. I mean,
music?
it was, you know, it was a rough time. It was a rough time. You know, there was a massive, great riot at Lewisham when the National Front marched through a black neighbourhood. Rock Against Racism came out of that.
But we had big riots last year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it was a time when, you know, hearts were changed, and often they were 14, 15, 16-year-old hearts. And I know that, I mean, two-tone came immediately after my period, which was punk and new wave, and Pauline's time, and the bands that were around, and Specials and The Beat. Often they'd been, you know, 16-year-olds when punk had happened, and they were maybe in Coventry or somewhere like that. They weren't down the Roxy in London, in Covent Garden. They were kids that heard this message and then came up with their own thing, you know, and dressed differently. But essentially, it was coming from the same. It was coming from the same sort. And I think I think it changed hearts. I think it changed. I think people grew up, and maybe. You know, when I was a kid, the first black person that my family loved was Muhammad Ali. We just loved him. We just absolutely loved him. And I'm sure that made some fundamental difference to my heart and to a million hearts like mine.
And yet here you are, Pauline, singing a song now from your new album, Made in Britain, where the chorus is, why can't we be multicultural?
Well, yes, I mean, in direct response, really, to our Prime Minister turned round and said, last year, in about, I don't know, February 2011, when he knew the EDL were marching on the street, he said the multiculturalism is dead. And you know, us people who are out there kind of thing and living in communities, living in multicultural communities. The street I live in has probably, you know, 6, 7 different kind of nationalities living in that street. They rub along quite nicely. People have been rubbing along quite nicely in this country since the 40s, pretty much, and even before. Why is it, you know, that sort of, you get a buzzword like multiculturalism. We don't seem to be able to invest that with anything other than the fact that this isn't working. You know, there is an agenda at work there.
Tell me about your childhood. You were brought up in Essex.
I was brought up in Romford.
In the 1950s, you were adopted by a white family in a white suburb. Can you tell me a bit about how that felt?
Well, that was quite strange. Everything was going along quite hunky-dory, the same as any other kid, I suppose, until just before I started school. And if you've got 2 white parents, you have to tell your child, if they're black, that you know, maybe you're not ours, before somebody, when you get to school, children love to tell the truth, don't they? And so you're going to be the elephant in the classroom, obviously, as it were. So I was told that I was adopted and that they weren't my real parents. Well, every adopted child has to take that on board.
But you were quite shocked. You got sick
I was
on the
totally
bedclothes,
shocked.
didn't you?
Yes, it made me vomit in that way. It was a very kind of visceral, I suppose, response to it, mainly because my parents and the family that I grew up in would, by today's standards, would hold racist views. Black people weren't really, let me put it bluntly, I suppose, you know, they weren't thought very much of in my family. The
So
fact
why
that they
had
had
they adopted?
they just wanted a girl. They didn't really care what colour, shape or size.
But that would suggest they weren't racist then, wouldn't it? Because it would suggest that they were girlist.
because I don't really think that all kids are cute. Black kids are cute, white kids are cute. There isn't, you just get uncute when you become a teenager.
As a teenager, you did become a little bit uncute, at least to your adopted parents, because I think your mum really had desires for you to be like Shirley Bassey, and you were much more Marsha Hunt, and you discovered sort of the black political movement in the United States, and you started your own little Black Panther movement and
yes,
so on.
with a membership of one in my bedroom, yeah.
I mean, did you find yourself at that point just growing impossibly distant from your home?
Yes,
life?
I did grow. I grew distant, really, at a much earlier age than that. If you grow up in an environment where the only people who look like you on the television are up against a wall and being hosed down because the only thing they, you know, in the southern states of America, which is the time of my most formative period, just because they wanted an education. You know, things like the human spirit and religion really recede into the background because you do wonder what the hell is going on.
I mean, just finally, there's an awful lot there in the book, and obviously we can't go through it all, but in the latter part of it, you describe your search for your birth mother, who you do eventually trace to Australia. But there seems to be a huge missing chunk left out of your life, because you also find out who your father was. But sadly, he died a year before you managed to trace him. And so though you've grown up all your life as a black person, you never actually had the black parent to have as a role model or to communicate with.
No, I didn't. I had a photo of him. But through that, I discovered my father had 8 wives. So that was quite a selection of people to go find, which was all very good. And out of that came a whole extended family, which has been absolutely wonderful. I've discovered a half-sister. Everybody is a half kind of thing. My father was quite prolific. And, that's something I'm going to address in the next book that I write, is those, what that really means, I suppose, to gain a family in middle age to a certain extent. And it was quite wonderful. It was quite wonderful.
Well, we look forward to you continuing to be prolific in literature and in music. Pauline Black, ladies and gentlemen. Now, e-readers may make carrying a personal library around less burdensome, but they're no good at all for keeping up with the Joneses. Showing off what you're capable of reading is a habit as old as literature itself. But for many book fans, it's guilty pleasures that are far more compelling. Nowadays, you can easily pretend to be digesting Proust when you're actually revisiting your Harold Robbins collections. We've asked our 3 guests to come out from behind their screens and reveal what they consider to be their guilty pleasures. And I'm going to start with you, Tony, please, if I might.
Yes, I'm rereading the great Ian Fleming. I've got Live and Let Die. I'm reading them in the order that they were written rather than the order they were filmed, of course.
Rereading. When you say rereading, how many times have you read them before?
I read them when I was 11, and they were the first grown-up books that I read of that were disapproved of, and were really, you know, the first books that had sex and violence, and so, you know, Fleming was the great English snob. He was the biggest snob of all time. And it's shocking to read them. It's really shocking. There's a line in Casino Royale, quite early on, where he says, Bond smoked his 70th cigarette of the day. And it's just kind of tossed away. And you think, you mean his 7th cigarette, surely, and plus a Nicorette patch. Or, no, I'll say that again, Bond smoked his 70th cigarette of the day. And it's full of this stuff, and it's quite shocking, you know, it's unbelievable. You know, because Bond is still around and is still such a huge industry, you know, the greatest fictional series in English literature, you know, bigger than Sherlock Holmes, Miss Marple, bigger than any of them. Because he's still around, we think that he's more contemporary than he is. You know, it's really, it's written in the aftermath of World War II.
Why do you feel guilty about reading them?
I don't really feel guilty. I feel quite proud, actually. But, but it fits very well into a slot called Guilty Pleasures, because it sounds as though I should feel guilty about it, you know. You should feel guilty about reading Ian Fleming. But I don't actually feel guilty about it.
Thank you very much, Tony. I know you're regretting now, aren't you, that you didn't pick Ian Fleming in the Bond books. Tell me about your guilty pleasure.
Well, I've picked a representative design book, John Walsh, Modern House. It's been a phenomenally successful book for Phaidon. You see them in all sort of design shops. And it just takes you through about 40 of the most beautiful houses around the world.
It's a sort of coffee table
habit you've got. It's a coffee table, but I keep it by the bed. And the reason why it's a guilty pleasure is that it's such a lie about what happiness is made of. Because basically, you look at these things and you think, if I lived here, all would be well. But actually, of course, life is much more complicated. But it charms you into thinking that, you know, these lovely environments are, you know, heaven on earth. And so I think, you know, when you've been dealing with the complexities of the day, it's nice just to escape into you know, these images of perfect serenity and calm, and you just sort of think, well, look, you know, if I lived there, everything would be perfect. Anyway, so for a few moments of the
Modern
day...
houses, perfect. Pauline, what have you got? Guilty pleasure?
Yes, I've always had a soft spot, I don't know, for the
secret.
Prince of Darkness. The third man, Mr. Peter Mandelson. I don't know what it is about him, but I just feel as though he's a lot more honest than most politicians.
Really?
Yes.
And have
even
you read
though
it all?
he is a spin doctor.
Have you read all of it?
Because I'm interested. If you put together a band and you go out there, particularly if you're a band that is well past its sell-by date, you've got to look at sort of it as though it's a campaign. And so I really like to read loads of kind of, you know, politicians, sort of particularly murky ones like him, about how they strategize and, you know, how they move things around and things like that, because there's lots of tips you can pick up.
And clearly from the picture on the jacket, he quite likes to live up to his Prince of Darkness
absolutely.
moniker,
This is a man who mentions his partner, I think, about 4 times, but his dog Bobby at least 5 or 6. I don't really
That's an Englishman for you.
That's an Englishman for you, yeah.
Great choices. Thank you all very much indeed. You'll find more details on these books, together with everything else discussed on today's show, on our website at sky.com/books. You can also follow us on Facebook and tweet us on Twitter. That's it for today. Many thanks to Pauline Black, Alain Dubotton, Tony Parsons, and all at the Bath Festival.